Welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast. My name is Carlos El Chacon, your host, and this is episode 5. Today we're talking about roles and responsibilities and the principle of least privilege with my guest, Robert Verell. Super excited to have Robert on today. He's been able to do some pretty interesting things in his environment. I'm glad that we're going to be able to share that with you today. As always, you can check out our show notes at sqldatapartners.com/podcast for today's information and for previous podcast episodes. We are on iTunes, and if you like today's episode, I invite you to give us some feedback, rate our program, and let us know how we're doing. If there's something you'd like to hear about, we'd like to get that information as well. And if you feel so inclined, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so that you're always getting the latest information, the latest podcasts that we're putting out. So with that, let's get into it, and welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, thanks for tuning in today. I would like to introduce our guest, Robert Verell. Robert's a DBA for Cigna Health Spring, where he has worked as a senior database administrator for 7 or 8 years now. He's a Microsoft certified IT professional, and he hails from Nashville, Tennessee. Robert, welcome to the program.
Hi, Carlos. Thank you for having me.
So, Robert, tell us what you're doing these days, and where people can connect with you.
Well, I'm speaking at SQL Saturdays, and that's always a great time.
Very fun.
Also, I'm pretty active on Twitter. This year, I've kind of launched my blog, and you can go to that on SQLcowbell.com. That's also my handle, if you will, on Twitter. It's at SQL Cowbell. It's SQL Cowbell. So I'm really easy to find.
Yes.
If you send me some kind of message or anything like that, I'm fairly quick to respond. What I'm currently working on is I'm working for Cigna Health Spring, and on the Cigna side, we're developing an internal cloud, and they're doing database as a service on that end. And there's a lot of challenges to that. There's no elevated rights for anyone, so we have to figure out how to develop certain ways of doing requests. So since you don't have elevated rights at the server level, you're not able to create logins. So how do you do that? Well, you have an interface, obviously, that someone can go to and say, well, I would like to have this user set up as a login in my database and give them these rights. And so basically they pass in some sort of Active Directory name, and then that gets sent over to a procedure that I've written, and it sets all that up for them.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on the show today, Robert, is that principle of least privilege, right? And then how SQL Server roles can help us attain that. And I know you've given, in the past, you've given a presentation about these roles. And I know that in your current position, you're working a lot with this. And so I thought you'd be perfect to come in and kind of chat with us about some of the nuances or difficulties that we might have, but also because you've been able to be successful, how folks can actually, get over the hump and implement this. So when we talk about the principle of least privilege, I guess we're talking about, right, giving users only the rights that we need.
That's correct. And Brian Kelly, if you're familiar with him, he had a blog post back, several months ago that I read, and it really hit home with me. As far as giving privileges to people on a database, you should, if you follow the principle of least privilege, you should go all the way down to the column level. If someone does not need to be able to see certain columns in a table, then they should not have rights to it. So that means going all the way down and getting granular and going that deep with it if you want to strictly follow the principle of least privilege. Now, I'm not telling anybody to go out and follow that to the letter, because I can't even imagine trying to administrate that.
Yeah, that's lots of overhead there.
There's a good bit of overhead there, yes. But at the same time, you want to make sure that you have a secure environment. You want to make sure that people have rights to things that they need, but not things that they don't need in case of any kind of malicious breach or something along those lines. If someone has access to sensitive data that they really shouldn't or don't really need to have access to, and their credentials were compromised, now you're talking about your organization having to send out, apologies to millions of people and
Right,
and losing money and a stock drop and things like that. And you just don't want that on your conscience or on your permanent record, as it were.
Sure. And I think, so while there may be folks, kind of gunning for that, okay, the column level security, ultimately what we're talking about today is much, much higher than that, and providing at least an initial environment where you can begin to, I don't want to say lock things down, but again, only give users what they need to make then your environment a little bit more secure. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, potentially avoid an opportunity where you may be unable to provide services that you thought you were going to be able to provide.
That's correct. Absolutely.
So let's go ahead and jump into some of the justification that users might request, or things that that our database administrators are getting requested with, and why they might default to those elevated privileges, either that being the administrator role, or in the case of the database and the SQL Server database, the DB owner role. Right. One of the ones that kind of jumps out to me is creating databases. Right. I think we've all been in that environment where we have a third-party application that wants to install something, and it needs to create a database.
Sure. And there's a common misconception that in order to be able to create databases that you need sysadmin rights, and that's a fallacy. If you give someone the DB creator role at the server level, then they will be able to create databases as they need to.
Right. And so that's I think that's a very good example of saying, well, here's what they need to do. There is a level of functionality, a little more granular, that will give them that opportunity to do that.
That's correct. Yes.
I think another one that you point out is create logins.
Sure. Now, in order to create logins, once again, you don't have to have the sysadmin rights in order to create a login on a server. If you give someone the security admin server role, then they'll be able to do that as well. Now, with the security admin role at the server level, there is a little bit of a loophole here, and Microsoft admits this as well, is that if you have someone who is in the security admin role, they're able to give someone sysadmin rights. So you could potentially set some up with security admin, and then they could turn around and just give themselves sysadmin rights. So from that perspective, I'm not going to say give that widespread, because you really shouldn't. But if you do have to give someone that, make sure you audit something along those lines. Make sure you're looking over that, or have some sort of policy-based management or alert set up that make sure that that's monitored to where you can know if someone is making server-side changes on roles or database roles. Sure.
So that kind of goes into then keeping up with your environments, that you're aware of, what's happened and changes that are going on in the system.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So one of your ideas, right, was that we should not be giving anybody DBO owner ever.
Ever. I will take that to the bank. I will take anybody, any challengers, any and all on that.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. And the reason why is the biggest thing with DB owner is, so you have explicit and implicit permissions. And when you give someone a database role, such as DB data reader, that implies that they will be able to read any table or view, basically run a select statement against any object in the database. And with DB owner, the implied permissions are astronomical. They're beyond anything that anybody really has to have if they're doing development work. The biggest implicit permission that comes with DB owner is the alter database permission. And
right.
This brings in a whole list of things that you can do that, from an administrative perspective, you don't want anybody else working on. It gives someone with the DB owner permission the ability to add data files. So let's say you have all of your data files are nice and neat. You have a dedicated drive for them, but the developer comes in and they run out of space for whatever reason while they're running something at 9 o'clock at night, and they decide, well, we need more space. So I know that there's space on the C drive, so I'll just put a new data file out on the C drive, and we'll just let it grow forever. We'll let it grow as long as it'll go. And eventually that will, of course, fill up, and then you'll have a C drive that's full, and you may have a server that goes down. And from production to dev, that's never a good thing, because that still halts development work, even if it is a development server.
Right.
Another thing that the alter database permission gives is the ability to change things like the recovery model. So let's say in a non-prod but higher environment, such as a UAT, or maybe you have an integrated testing environment where you're wanting to test things very much like production. So you have transaction log backups, or so you want that kind of similarity to production. Well, if they're able to change that recovery model, or maybe you have it in simple, okay, right, and you're not taking transaction log backups, they could go in and change that recovery model from simple to full. And now all of a sudden, 2 hours later, now you've got a full transaction log on one of your testing databases.
Right.
Because you're not taking transaction log backups.
That's right. And the application grinds to a halt.
Sure. And then on the flip side of that, if they switch from full to simple, now you're trying to take transaction log backups, those jobs are going to fail, and you're going to lose any kind of restore chain that you potentially have, because you've got to change from simple back into full and then take a full backup before you can start taking transaction log backups.
Yeah, this was the big one for me. I thought that that idea of breaking the backup chain, and that's that example of, so as database administrators, right, we always think of job number one as being able to make the data available. And the source of that, or the core rather, is in those backups. And if a change is made there, or even if a full backup were to be taken and it breaks up our backup chain, we then put ourselves in jeopardy of being unable to provide that service to our users that they're expecting. And things can get kind of complicated fairly quickly.
Absolutely. The last one, and this was always the biggest kicker for me. I know you said the restore chain is big for you, but the alter database permission allows a user to take a database and take it offline. but the biggest thing isn't just that. It's that you can take it offline, and then you're not able to bring it back online, because you have to be in the sysadmin role to be able to do that.
There you go. So they're clicking around in the GUI, and oops.
Yep.
And there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so just between you and me, Robert, have you ever had anyone do that?
Yes, I have.
Oh! Well, there you go. Okay, I guess I consider myself fortunate now that that has not happened to me. We've just discussed, right, some of the reasons why we don't want to be giving the DBO owner role to our users. And so we have this concept of role, or kind of, dividing and conquering some of the permissions that are available. We've already talked about the DB creator role, what that means. We've also discussed the security admin as well. Those are probably the two big ones, or at least that I've more used. Any of the other roles that you want to talk about, the default SQL Server roles that you use on a regular basis?
At the server level, there's really only one. I'm of the opinion that a lot of the server roles are, I don't want to call them useless. I can see where there would be certain times when you'd want to give that role versus giving someone sysadmin rights, obviously. But I believe they're really specific to maybe some special environment or some sorts, like disk admin, which allows you to manage disk space and manage data files and log files. That's something that you would assume a DBA would do, not someone who's going to have you. And you would assume that your DBAs are going to have sysadmin rights.
Sure. Yeah, potentially if, maybe your SAN person, maybe they didn't have a DBA, and I don't know, the disk people wanted to get in there.
Sure, and they wanted to manage their own disk space for whatever purposes, then sure, I guess that would be a good example. Sure.
Okay. So ultimately, we talk a little bit about rolling our own, and other applications have used these. And even in, some of the more familiar ones, at least in my mind, within SQL Server, include the role in MSDB, right? Like database mail user role, right? So if you create a mail profile and you want that user to be able to send mail, you grant them rights to the database mail user role, and then they can send email all day long.
Sure, absolutely. There's a lot of roles in MSDB, and I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know what all of them do.
Sure.
um, from an implicit standpoint, I don't know what every single one of them does, but I can say that I know that one that I use pretty regularly is the operator role, the SQL agent operator role, as well as the SQL agent reader role. The reader role is a real big one because it allows users to be able to view job history. And a lot of times developers will have automated processes and they want to see run times and things like that and compare it. And that's good. We want our developers doing that. As an administrator, you want them looking at those kind of numbers. And if you give them view job history, they'll be able to view all of that stuff. The operator role is good if you have jobs that you're wanting people to be able to execute as much as you want them to be able to. I was kind of long-winded on how I said that, but if you have a team and all you want them to do is to be able to execute jobs, then you can give them that role and they'll be able to execute any job on the entire server. Now, the reader role will allow you to do that as well, but you have to specifically own the job in order to do that. The operator role also allows you to be able to create jobs, but if you do not have them set up with any other kind of permissions in any databases or anything like that, then they won't be able to run any kind of T-SQL. And if you don't have any proxies set up for them, then they won't be able to run SSIS packages or anything like that.
So, compañeros, one of the things, we're trying to do is to get some information out there. And I think what Robert just said was huge, right? Giving users the reader role to your jobs is one that I see in a lot of different places, particularly like your SSIS packages and other things that might be there. There is a way to give them that privilege without giving them the keys to the kingdom. And so I think that that's something that will be of value to a lot of folks.
Sure, that's good.
And it's right there kind of, within our grasp. We just need to execute and, grant that role.
Right.
Another one I was going to talk about was the RS exec role, which is both in the MSDB and the master DB. And that's for obviously reporting services. So for those who are going to be creating subscriptions or publishing reports, we make sure that role is available to them so that they can have that privilege. Most of the time, I think that actually comes through the application when you're adding them into reporting services. But I have seen from time to time, or whatever, mostly I guess with my migrations, where that doesn't quite get set. And so that just another example of specifying roles that a user would get.
Yes, I agree. That's actually a great example. Yes.
So we've kind of painted the picture. We shouldn't be giving folks DBO owner role. Talked about why, some of the other things, but now they're saying, well, wait a second, right? I don't want to be bothered every time a user needs to, create a database, but maybe I don't want to give them that DB creator role, or there's other things like they want to do traces. Another one that we haven't talked about is viewing dynamic management views, so that they want to do a little bit of tuning or performance. And you don't want that person to be coming back to you, all the time, requesting these little one-off permissions.
Sure, understandable. And with that, and I can certainly respect the need to want to see that kind of data, because as stated earlier, we want our developers to be able to go in and view those kind of things so that they can tune their queries and we have a good, stable, fast running environments. And because when developers and DBAs get along, then your end users are very happy as well, and your organization is happy as a whole. As far as the DMVs,
I think we can also do the view database state, or
correct, yes,
or view server state if you wanted to give them, the whole server levels.
That's right. Yes,
would be another way to do that.
Yes, there's many ways to do that. That's correct.
Right. And so actually another part that I wanted to get to was your development, or kind of putting together some of these roles or some of these permissions into a script or into a role that you've called DB developer.
That's correct. I'm really big on this role. It's something that I use in my organization in our shared development environments that we have. And it gives developers the ability to develop in a shared environment without having the DB owner role. So there's no risk from my perspective about having any of the things that we talked about earlier, where we're saying, well, we don't want to mess with any kind of restore chains, or we don't want someone accidentally dropping a database, or we don't want someone changing a symmetric key that we don't want changed. Just as some examples.
Right.
It gives you the ability to do all those things you want your developers to work on, which includes stuff like being able to script out objects so that you can see the code behind things. There's not a role that gives you that except for the DB owner role. Well, my DB developer role that has that permission in it, it's where you can still do those things.
And so Robert's been very generous with us, compañeros, and he's going to make that script available for us on his site. And so we'll have the link in the podcast notes. So we hope that you'll check that out and start playing with that. So another way that we can help manage some of these permissions, and this is more, I guess, from the administration perspective. And I think we've been kind of headed in this direction for a long, long time. And that is in the using groups for permissions.
Yes, I strongly recommend using groups. It's recommended by Microsoft to do so. Basically, the way that my environment is set up is we have groups set up for anything that we think needs to have read-only access. And if someone needs that access, we simply take their user and we put them into that Active Directory group, instead of going into the server and creating a login and creating a database user and then putting them in a database role. And the reason why is whenever they change roles or if they leave the organization, it's very easy to remove them out of those permissions.
Right.
If we're wanting to remove them by using AD groups, all we do is just take them out of the Active Directory groups. That's very easy to do. Whereas if we create a SQL login for them, then we have to log into the server. We have to delete the user and hope that they don't have any objects in a schema. And then we have to delete the login. So there's a decent amount more work that goes behind that.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point there, is that we can be assured that they're not going to own any of those objects, and it's much easier to put them in or take them out. I mean, we even use that for our DBAs, creating that group and then adding them in. And so that way we know who has elevated privileges on a server based on those groups.
That's correct. That's also another place where principal of least privilege can really come in. Let's just take a really easy example here. Let's say that you have a server that was manually restarted. Well, you know for a fact that on the Windows side, that in order to be able to restart a server, you have to have administrative rights. So you go into the server and you say, okay, who has admin rights? And that basically narrows your list down of, okay, well, one of these people has to be the person who did it. You can apply the same thing at the SQL Server level. If a table is dropped, you can say, well, I know that these are the people in this database that have the permission to drop these tables. So it has to be somebody in this list.
Right. Yeah. So making that auditing a little bit easier there.
Yes.
Well, I think that is going to wrap up our discussion on privilege of least permission. Is there anything else that you think we should hit on before we change gears?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Well, Robert, thanks for this discussion about roles and permissions. I think it's been valuable. I definitely think everyone should be, checking out your DB developer role. I think it'll be very, very valuable. And as I'm always trying to create value for folks listening, I'd like to share another way that they can learn about SQL Server. Hello there, compañeros. I want to tell you about a unique SQL Server training opportunity that is unlike anything you've encountered. And as a listener of this podcast, you're entitled to a special offer. SQL Cruise is a premier training experience set in the most unlikely of places, a cruise ship. Tim and Amy Ford have created a wonderful culture on SQL Cruise. With 5 or 6 technical leads from various industry sectors, you and roughly 20 other students will talk shop in classes while at sea. And while you are in port, you can enjoy the wonderful world we live in, either by yourself or with the group. The beauty of SQL Cruise is the unique relationships you will form with other SQL cruisers. Worried about leaving your spouse? Bring them along. I did, and she had a great time with the group. In fact, I have been on SQL Cruise twice, and I'm looking to go a third time. You may be wondering if this is serious training, and I can assure you it is as good as any conference you will attend on land. It never crossed my mind that I could be talking about SQL Server with several Microsoft MVPs on the beaches of St. John's. I know you must have other questions, so I suggest you head over to SQLcruise.com and check out the site. Once you are satisfied and you want to sign up, when you get to the question, would you be so kind to share the name of who referred you and what source material led you to us? You enter SQL Data Partners, and Tim will ensure you get $100 off the training registration. This is a great offer, and I hope this $100 savings will entice you to check out the site. I did, and went on the Caribbean cruise and had a great experience, and I know you will too. Maybe I'll see you on board. So head on over to SQLcruise.com and use the code SQL Data Partners to save $100. Okay, so as we're wrapping up here, Robert, we have a couple last questions. We'd like to have you share a little bit more about yourself. So what's your favorite SQL tool? Paid tool, free tool, but what tool do you like and why do you use it?
Gosh, that's a really tough question. There's a lot of tools that I use that I like. SSMS is my favorite tool.
Okay, there you go.
No, I'm kidding. I've got a better tool than that. If I had to give a really good tool to use, I would say probably Spotlight by Dell. It's probably the one that I really enjoy. It gives a lot of really good data, and the visualization of it to me is what really, really does it for me. I love other products by other organizations out there, and I actually use them. I'm very fortunate in my environment to have a lot of toys, as it were. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, Spotlight is something that I'm into every single day. I'm looking at stuff every day in there and evaluating things in it.
Okay. So the Dell tool, that's paid. So it is interesting. I actually went to a session by Adam Mechanic once, and he talked about monitoring, and he made the comment. So to me, like Adam Mechanic is like, one of the people, right, that you like knows so much about SQL Server.
Right. As he's forgotten more in the last day than I've learned in the last year. Yes.
That's right. Like one of those people. And he made the comment. He's like, oh, well, I would put a monitoring solution in all of my environments. I'm like, interesting that, that while, yes, you could kind of homegrown some of your own, that just that ability to have a product that is stable, is consistent along all your environments, and then being able to give you some of that history, I thought was kind of an interesting comment. We'd like to hear about kind of an instance or an experience that you've had that helps you remember why it is that you enjoy being a database administrator.
That's really tough. Do I have to limit it to one?
So we are looking for just that one.
Okay. All right. So, I could mention, if I had to give stories, I could mention SQL Saturdays. Those are always great. Okay. Another one that I've done is I've done a couple data center migrations. Those are fantastic. You learn a lot during those. But I would say probably one of the best DBA stories I had was something that I actually made a blog post about. And it was where I basically implemented compression earlier this year. And simply by compressing a partition in a single table, a nightly load increased by probably 20%. Okay. I was simply amazed by that. That was just incredible for me. That's the one thing that kind of sticks out to me, and the reason why it was so big is because it was something that I had wanted to do for a long time, and I had partially implemented it back, 6 months ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then 2 or 3 months ago, when I got around to finishing it up and getting it completely done, the day that I got it completed, they came through, and it ended up being one partition in one table that I compressed that basically really did a lot of good work from it. But it was just a really good feeling to be able to implement something from an administrative side, and developers all the way down to end users saw a great benefit from it, and they felt that it was a really good thing, and they wanted to know where my magic wand was. When you do things like that, it really does make you feel good, and it makes you feel very proud. But yeah, that's the best I got. Sure. Very good. Very good. I think, anytime we can add value there to the business, polish our credentials a little bit, if you will, and makes us feel good. Well, very good. Before we get to the last question, I want to remind folks if they want to connect with you via Twitter, they can do so at SQL Cowbell,
and you have your new blog, sequelcowbell.com. And so for our last question, Robert, if you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why would you want it?
Ooh, I'm going to go with, that's a really tough question. I'm going to go with the ability to see the future.
Okay. There you go. Divination.
Yes.
Whatever that.
Yeah, that's a great word for it. Yes.
Very good. Very good. Well, Robert, thanks again for being on the show. I think it was, I had a great time. I think the folks who are listening will be able to learn a lot.
That's great. And Carlos, thank you for having me. It has been a pleasure. And as always, I enjoy talking with you. I'd love to be back on if you ever wanted to have me. And I'm an open book. So if you reach out to me on Twitter, I am more than happy to answer any questions. I've even answered questions to people who have written in Japanese kanji before. So
Nice. Okay. Man of many talents.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks again, Robert. We'll see if we can't have you on again. And compañeros, thanks for tuning in. It's been another great show. And we'll see you on the sequel trail.
Sequel Data Partners.